Good morning, folks. Since it's 8:30, I want to get started right away. Hope everybody's doing okay. This is another installment of the Ask an Economist series with Chabin Concepts. I want to thank Chabin Concepts and Kaiser Marston Associates for making this happen and sponsoring these things. We're going to get right into it and talk about where we're headed. And this is kind of one of those weird middle weeks in terms of the economic data. And so I'm going to tell you some things that have recently happened and also catch you up a little bit on what's coming. And then on June 1st, when we do the next installment of this series, we're going to have a lot of data to talk about in terms of the state and county level data. But we're trying to just look at where jobs are going in terms of the connectivity of those jobs to the greater economic outcomes and how we're lifting policy and what that means for jobs. Construction is one of the places we're looking at very closely because some places actually allowed construction to continue, which means they may not be as hurt coming out of the shelter in place as we slowly lift that policy. But we will see what parts of California are affected, and after we see the lift, whether or not those places that allowed construction to continue actually were supported during the shelter in place and ultimately may emerge more quickly. And then we're going to talk a little bit about business loss, and we're also going to talk about the California budget and trying to jam both of those together with the idea that there's some very recent developments in terms of the California budget and so-called May revise, and also the prediction of the California Department of Finance about what's going to happen with the California economy. So the recovery is going to be a tale of three policies. And if you've been in previous installments of this, I usually start with this sort of trichotomy between monetary policy and fiscal policy, which are teaming up to try to resolve and, in a sense, mitigate the negative effects of social policy. And the hope is by the multiplier effects of these two policies working together, we will get more than the sum of the parts out of them, and ultimately more than the negative of the social policy to lift us up out of the doldrum of this hibernation period we've been in. But in many ways, we're going to be talking about how these three policies worked against each other, with each other, and ultimately pulled us out, analogous to what happened at the end of the Great Recession. A real quick data reminder, the most recent data on the first quarter of 2020 suggested we saw negative 4.8% growth in GDP, which is a relatively strong contraction. The second quarter and some of the predictions are much, much worse. I'll show you those in just a minute. Pretty much it was driven by consumption, and then we're going to see business investment start to sag. Government spending will hopefully pick up, as I suggested with the fiscal policy. And international trade has been sort of an offset in that we've exported less than we've imported, but we're actually reducing how much we're importing as well. On the job side at the national level, 14.7% unemployment. On Friday, we will get the data for California and all the counties, and that's true for all the states in the United States as well. But the main drivers in the job losses are leisure and hospitality, personal services like hair salons, nail salons, auto shops, those kind of things. Durable goods manufacturing is also down. And so we're watching to also see how manufacturing emerges from this, given all the shifting supply chains and the shifting demand, because those things are somewhat linked. If you think about food and beverage manufacturing as just one example, that links farmers to food supply chains, which then links them ultimately to restaurants and grocery retail. With the contraction in restaurant services demand, and a lot of our restaurants basically closed or at reduced capacity because now they're just doing takeout, that affects the entire food and beverage supply chain. And we've seen some wild shifts inside that supply chain, but it is something to watch going forward in terms of non-durable manufacturing with respect to food and beverage. Okay, so these are data we've been watching quite a bit, and we've seen even more craziness the last couple of weeks, but here's the key. These data are the new initial claims for unemployment insurance, or I should say the initial claims for new unemployment insurance. And the idea here is that this is through the end of April, and you're going to see something here in a second that's subtle but potentially very important. Those are the last three recessions since 1986. Here's the US data, or yes, these are the US data. Now, if you look at the far right-hand side, you'll see that there's a lot of action at the very top of that quick spike in the blue line. That more thickness up there suggests that we are actually at the end of this initial spike, which means we may have peaked, and I'll show you a little bit more in a minute. Here's California in contrast, same type of deal. We may be peaking. So there's some thickness because it went up so quickly. And you can notice how it's dwarfed a lot of the other action around the recessions. But the idea is that when these initial claims for unemployment insurance rise, it portends more unemployment, and we know that pain is coming. The national numbers I just told you suggest that these claims have turned into lost jobs. But that change at the very top is something to watch closely, in the sense that when that peaks, we tend to have a situation in which we have we have a shorter time in which unemployment stays at the very top of its own cycle. So we'll watch that very closely as we go forward. Okay, now, here's another way of thinking about that. Now I'm looking not at quarterly data, but now I'm looking at just the last 12 weeks. So check this out. Here is the movement of new weekly unemployment insurance claims moving through the US, and you can see it moved up very quickly, very little before the middle of March, and then these spiking into the 3, 5, 6 million, 7 million claims. Crazy changes. But when it peaks, we usually start to see the end of the initial move toward the rise of unemployment, which means about 12 months later, unemployment should peak. And we're seeing some forecasts suggesting that's exactly what's happening. And here's California in contrast. So notice that there is a very similar move between the unemployment claims at the US level and at California. But if both have peaked, as painful as the next few months are going to be, it can be a good sign that we're not going to lose any more jobs than we already have. But of course, there's going to be a lot of jobs lost. So let's talk a little bit more in depth about those jobs lost. And I'm just going to show you April 2020 right now. I had originally was going to show you the end of the Great Recession, but I think it's more focal to look at just what happened in April. You can see those data that I talked about earlier: durable goods manufacturing, retail services, other services, an array of personal services, leisure and hospitality, which includes hotels and restaurants. Those are where the major job losses have happened. And one way of thinking about that negative 47.2 is that as compared to April 19, 47.2% of the people that had jobs in April 2019 have now lost jobs in terms of the total volume of jobs in those industries. So that is a big, big change for one industry to handle. And we knew hotels and restaurants were going to have a really tough time getting through this. But these data at least tell you that that pain has already arrived. Another way of looking at change at the national level to sort of portend what might be happening at the local level, and a lot of this is just tee up for the data we're going to see starting on Friday, is the average hours worked. And this is through the end of April. So these data are relatively new. And what's also good in these data, as we'll see in a minute, is that leisure and hospitality, while very much hurt in the last couple of months, may actually be seeing a slight turnaround. And if you look at data on hotel occupancy and you look at adjustments that restaurants have made, we're hearing that on the street that there has been some pickup. But let's see what happens. Generally speaking, there's not much change. These are in percentage change from the previous year, which means with respect to average hours, we should not have an enormous amount of change from year to year. Now, you'll notice that on the left-hand side, there's this wobble below the zero axis, which was the Great Recession. And then we kind of weave around zero on average. This is the US overall. But here we go industrially. There's construction. You can see construction is more episodic in its changes. When it grows very rapidly. It's also somewhat seasonal. Here's manufacturing. Manufacturing tends to get hit a little bit harder, pop a little bit harder when we come out of recession, and then kind of weave around the average. But notice on the far right-hand side that manufacturing has taken a dip. I talked about that earlier with respect to durable goods. So equipment and let's say more advanced manufacturing generally has been hit. Retail has not been that bad. Even though I said retail jobs have sagged, the number of hours that people are working has actually stayed relatively stable. And the idea there is that, well, we've lost some jobs, some other jobs have picked up, and especially the number of hours that people are working. So the average hours of retail have kind of stayed stable for right now, which is suggesting that parts of retail have gotten absolutely hammered and other parts have stayed either stable or actually have grown. So think of grocery. Here's professional services, pretty much weaving on the average, which professional services, drive a lot of the activity in our economy. Here's information. These are mainly portable jobs. Think of software coding and other computer programming jobs. So we've actually seen a little bit of a pickup here, mainly because online shopping has picked up. So there's been more coding jobs, but also those jobs are relatively portable. But here's leisure and hospitality. So you can see the real sink in hotel and restaurants, but notice that little hook at the very bottom of the far right-hand side. The cool thing about that is that we may have already seen the end of the negative part of the cycle. We've already hit the trough. Now that is a huge plus for those industries, but it's also historically very important. It's very rare when you see contractions in an economy that happen with this kind of speed. And so it's tough to look at a historic analog very easily. Notice in the Great Recession, it dipped below zero and kind of lingered around there for a while. But all this has happened in the span of a couple of months rather than a couple of years, which the far left-hand side of this graph portrays. Okay, and there's our average again. Now, housing has been a place that we've had of some more recent forecasts, and there's somewhat of a contrast here. So Zillow has been very optimistic. If you look at Zillow's forecast, they are, especially in places like California, they're expecting almost no negative growth at all, and actually somewhat positive, and I'll get back to the positivity more deeply in a minute, throughout California and the United States. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which tend to be bellwether housing forecasts because they see an enormous amount of data around housing based on how they purchase conforming mortgages. They're less optimistic, but they're still relatively optimistic. They see relatively flat growth, but not sinking negative growth like we saw at the beginning of the Great Recession. Now, a lot of it is going to depend on a few things. For example, we already have relatively high prices in place, so getting percentage changes to go down quickly is not that hard to do. But the growth is really in a mix of suburban and rural. If you think about California, one of the things we might see is that we might see some outmigration from the cities toward suburban and rural California, with the idea that people want to take their job and go someplace that's less urban. They want to get out of a potential reinfection area where the probability of being infected is higher. And so when you think about all those together, Zillow is suggesting that we might see a really strong demand in suburban and rural California. So places like Northern California, Eastern California, we might see a lot more housing action there than in our urban centers, which still have relatively positive outcomes. With interest rates dropping as dramatically as they have, the supposition is people are going to have a lot of reasons to demand housing. It's going to so much depend on jobs, and that's the key. Will construction move forward in such a way to provide more units? Will people have their jobs back sooner than later, where they're not putting up existing units? And that mix of supply against what we hope is relatively strong demand should keep housing prices, if not stable, growing. But a lot of it depends on the mix of how many more new units we build, because we want construction to go, and this is the real conundrum we face. We want construction to continue moving forward, but we don't want to put a bunch of supply or a bunch of units on the supply side that may not be demanded for some time. Now, let's talk about a couple of forecasts to sort of wrap up the national picture and what is new, or at least most recent. This is a forecast from the National Association of Business Economists, and this looks at the next 8 quarters, and this happened in April. So the first quarter of 2020, that data already in, and that's somewhere closer to the median forecast, but still double the negativity of the median forecast. And those first 3 columns are real GDP. So as I told you earlier, first quarter estimate, negative 4.8. The median forecast here was negative 2.4, and then negative 26.5 the next quarter. Economists are starting to rally around about negative 32, which is not as bad as the nasty one in the middle, but still worse than the median, and certainly not as optimistic as the 5 highest forecasters in this set. But then if we look at unemployment rates, and this may be more important generally speaking in terms of on the ground movement, because GDP sometimes is seen as kind of an abstract data point. Unemployment rates tend to be a lot more dramatic and focal on people on the street and residents. You can see that the 5 highest forecasts for unemployment rates are very high. So 20% unemployment rate in the second quarter is what's currently being considered the worst case scenario by these economists, pardon me. And then the median forecast is about 12%. Well, the first month of the second quarter, April, was 14.7. We're expecting the second month, May, to be somewhere closer to 20 at the national level, and then start to subside. Based on the data I showed you before with respect to unemployment insurance claims, we will see. But these data tend to historically be very good. These forecasters tend to be very precise in the way that they've looked at the way the past has played out against their forecasts. But I want to show you data that just hit the street yesterday. So parallel to those data, which is 40 forecasters, and some of them are mixed in this forecast too. There's another 40 forecasters that are talked to by the Philadelphia Fed, which puts this out. And this one has been very precise historically speaking. And that's what they see over the next 4 quarters. So notice that the previous forecast, which happened before COVID-19 really seized the economy, was for this sort of slow moving economy through this year. And then you can see it down at the bottom in those first 2 columns, not much change over the next few years. Well, now that change has hit us negatively, unfortunately. They're thinking about 32%. So that's why I said that economists are starting to rally somewhere between 31 and 32. We're starting to see enough data now where people are being confident that that's where we're going to end up. That's a historic contraction in productivity in our economy. But then they're expecting the third and fourth quarters, and then the first quarter of next year to be relatively strong. So these economists are relatively optimistic about where we might be going once we hit bottom. And a lot of it depends on how we come out of these doldrums. Here's the unemployment rate in contrast. They're only seeing it going up to about 16%. We will see. It's certainly going to creep up closer to 20, and these economists are using GDP and unemployment. There's a natural relationship between those two called Okun's law. They're using that, and you can notice that it's exactly 1/2 the percentage change in the second quarter as the unemployment rate. Though that's a natural connection between those two data points through what's known as Okun's law. So that's the annual going forward, and you can see that after 2020, things are pretty robust in terms of classic growth in the American economy, and the unemployment rate slowly subsides. But here's the kicker in this forecast, folks. We started this at a relatively strong level of unemployment and GDP growth, historically speaking. We are not going to get back to where we were maybe through 2023, and I'm going to show you more data on that in just a second for California. So these two words I've talked about almost every time I've done this, depth and duration. It's absolutely critical to recognize these two are what policy is trying to avoid. Not so deep, not so long, but we've got to get the economy back open. The Federal Reserve has talked about we might be in a recession for the next few years, and about 40% of households employed in February earning less than $40,000 a year lost their job in the last 2 months. So 40% of that low-wage workforce. Now that can be a drag on the economy, and the Federal Reserve, in thinking about lifting interest rates, is watching those kind of data closely. Chair Powell was actually interviewed last Wednesday, and these are just some of the comments he made about how long the recession they're projecting is going to last and what they might do about interest rates. And that means they're basically going to have a low interest rate environment for some time to come. Now, the California Department of Finance has put out its forecast that then generates the budget revise. And so I want to show you these data. These are their projected year-end changes from the year-end 2019. For the year-end 2020, how many jobs were lost? Year-end 2021, the year-end 2022, and the year-end 2023. So the negative numbers are bad. That means that we are still below the 2019 quarter 4 end. And you can see across all these industries that that's a big deal. But the two major lines that you might want to look at are civilian employment, which is the second data line down. We're still 6.5% below where we ended 2019 in terms of total employment in in California. And for non-farm, we're negative 6.2% below where we were. So that they're corroborating what we just talked about with maybe being through 2023 before we actually get closer to the baseline where we were when all this started. And you can see a lot of other industries looking down at the very bottom. Other services, personal services, and leisure and hospitality, maybe 25% or more down from where we started the year. And that's at the end of 2023. Wow. Okay, well, some of the causes of what we've seen in the California budget. I'm going to show you now some wild numbers. You'll see here that the percentage change from 2019 and 2020 for the California budget. So those Department of Finance forecasts then lead to changes in what the state sees coming in budget. About almost 20% drop in sales tax and personal income tax this coming year based on the drop in economic activity this year. And they're not giving much after that, but the supposition is they're going to be climbing along with those job losses. They're expecting the corporate tax level actually to pick up a little bit, with the idea that we might see some more action on the business side versus the personal side in terms of growth of income. But the real thing that I want you to look at, which is this graph here, which kind of restates those data briefly, is this. Governor Brown had talked about a rainy day fund. Well, that rainy day fund was about $16 billion. Well, now about $8 billion of that is going to be used to fill the hole. And we're still going to have a relatively large deficit on the other side of it. So how the California state economy moves affects how the state government moves, which then affects how cities and counties gain access to financing for a lot of activity in terms of social services and healthcare. How those changes happen is going to be very intriguing going forward. And you can already see it. This graph shows those expenditures. They're expecting health and human services, that core of social assistance the state provides, to stay relatively healthy at the cost of a lot of other programs. So this shifting budget, the reason I'm showing you this is because if you think about economic development and you think about jobs, the shifting change in the way the state spends money can easily bleed into construction, manufacturing, and a lot of professional and personal services, including retail and restaurants, based on just the economic activity that's being supported by the state economy. When that contracts, assuming there's no federal income that's going to come in and fill this hole before we get back to baseline, that can affect a lot of rural and suburban areas. Urban areas are not maybe as badly affected by this, but we're going to watch very closely to see what changes happen. But the California state budget is now evolving to a place that was is now forecasted through 2023 as relatively negative, and we'll see whether or not we come out of these shadows in such a way that we're able to help move this back toward baseline. But this is a lot of pain and could be a lot of big changes for state and local government. And there's the health and human services. So to wrap on that idea that how budgets go at the city and county level is going to shift quite a bit. And the thing that's nasty about it is that a lot of what happens at the county and city level is a function of consumption. So as those budgets fall, it shifts the way that cities and counties look at moving projects forward, and it might affect how they look at housing. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to shape the way we're talking to our local officials and say, look, you cannot stop projects from happening with the idea that the housing market is guaranteed to contract. We got to watch very closely how construction moves forward and how basically our economy turns out of this shelter-in-place cycle and trying to get people back to their normal lives. But that consumer confidence and the length of time people are out of their jobs are going to dictate a lot of what happens at the local level, and then that can bleed into economic and workforce development, unfortunately, if local officials lose sight of the bigger picture because the short term is so nasty. And we will see how that happens in terms of how the state budget contraction starts to affect our local economies. Okay, just to leave you some ideas, malls. One of the things we got to look for in terms of opportunities is what we're going to do with our malls. We know that retail is going to contract. How much it contracts might lead to some opportunities, believe it or not. Can we use our malls in different ways as logistics points, small-time manufacturing? Could we see something like what Berkeley is now doing in expanding out into the street in terms of providing more social distancing for their downtown restaurants? Will the malls become a place where we could do that in the middle open areas in such a way that we can maybe provide a shifting marketplace and shifting needs for those businesses in such a way that they can remain open? We'll see how that goes. We know some retail is going to go away and the malls are going to have some serious challenges ahead, but we might want to think a little bit more deeply about how we help them. And some of that is because our local municipality, or some of that will be helped by our local municipalities thinking more about zoning. So we're going to have a serious zoning challenge on our hands in a couple of years, if not in a couple of months, with the idea, can we flex in ways to recognize that we're going to have to rethink our commercial real estate? And a lot of places that are already, a lot of businesses are already rethinking how they're going to utilize that. We need to think about that municipally in such a way that if you have a long spell of vacancy, that's not good for your local economy. And furthermore, is there something you could put in that space that would thrive by just thinking more creatively about the use of that space? And then being a partner on construction. So thinking about how those partnerships between the municipality and economic development are going to see some serious challenges and must partner together for us to emerge from the shadows of the shelter in place in such a way that's very positive. But the things I just talked about above, I think are the two major challenges of how that partnership can work. Our malls are this edifice to a time that where we thought retail would be more brick and mortar. Well, that has slowly faded and it's going to be very hammered here in the next few months and quarters. How we transition through this period is key in terms of how we utilize that commercial real estate that's already in place and can be a place of opportunity. Okay. So over the next few weeks, we're going to see more data. Specifically on Friday, we're going to get state and county data about jobs. A lot of people are out of work, but that might turn if we turn the corner correctly and policy starts to achieve its purpose. Are we getting closer to the peak cases? We don't want to have a reinfection, but that's going to be something that's going to put the brakes on reopening quickly and potentially on how the economy evolves if consumer confidence and business confidence do not recover because those cases have not faded. And ultimately, folks, what businesses will survive? So one of the key aspects of how economic development is going to work going forward and really how our economy is going to move, what business capacity is left in the wake, and how can we get back up to where we were quickly, easily, and potentially get people working again? And what can economic development do? It can drive those partnerships, as I suggested before, and really think creatively about the use of space and how we can, in a sense, sustain businesses through this time, which is going to be very challenging. So folks, with that, thank you so much again for coming today and listening to me talk about these items. I'm now going to turn it over to Vicki, who's going to hopefully ask me some questions that you may have.
All right, thank you, Rob. Looks like we do have one question. Okay, some Chico restaurants are having to offer $23 an hour to get their employees to return to work because of the extra $600 a week UI. Is there any effort to end this inducement to stay on UI before its scheduled July end date?
Unfortunately, no, besides raising wages. It's an unfortunate opportunity cost of providing a relatively robust social assistance package. And for employers, it sucks. There's really not, this friction is something we knew was going to come. We heard the expansion and the augmentation of unemployment insurance benefits. We knew that businesses were going to struggle to try to draw people back in. There's multiple lawyers I've talked to who are employment lawyers who say that it's a very cloudy world in terms of whether or not you offer a person a job, and if they don't take that job, specifically the one that they had before, if they can potentially lose their benefits by not taking that job back. That's a murky place right now. And what I've heard is that if you put that offer in writing and basically lay out what the conditions of the job is against what your old job was, and that person does not take the job, then there's a high probability they would lose their unemployment benefits by not taking the job back. So there's this balancing act by employers where you don't want to make your old employees mad and then having them come back as disgruntled employees. And at the same time, you want them to come back because you see a need to grow again. That we knew that this was coming with the relatively robust unemployment insurance, and we will see how it evolves. I'm hoping we see in the next few months, if not the next few weeks, that there's some edict that comes down that says, look, if you get a written offer to go back to your old job and you don't take it, and your employer, pings EDD, you will lose your benefits. So that is going to initiate some strange sociopolitics at work, where if people come back to work. But I think it's the right thing in terms of how policy should sort of reshape our economic lives.
Okay, thank you. So when you mentioned the 2021 first quarter will be strong, and then 2023 will get us back to where we were prior to COVID, what sectors do you see will be the strongest, and where should new college graduates perhaps be looking?
That's a great question. So we have the same, I work for Sonoma State University here in California as my daytime job. And one of the things we're concerned about is what do we tell our graduates in a time in which we see serious job contraction? Professional services, the coding, the computer services, or the computer programming jobs are kind of core jobs now in our economy. Retail as a job is going to contract. I don't see that coming out quickly. So for most graduates, especially if they are in business majors or in majors in which they're likely to get some kind of a job, either in sales or in some sort of professional format, that's probably where a lot of this is going to come out. Sales, maybe not as much, but construction jobs, we may see some growth there for students that are graduating at the high school level and at the community college level. After that, it gets very murky because we don't know how government is going to contract. And a lot of our students, especially at the baccalaureate level, tend to look at government jobs as a beginning, if not a career. Those changes might come and hurt the pipeline that normally exists after a college degree is earned. But it's probably going to be in professional services where we see the most growth initially, simply because it's the least damaged part of our economy thus far.
Okay. The city of Los Llanos has a population of about 40,000 people. Can you give us any idea of what the top two things we should be doing now?
Absolutely. You should be thinking about your downtown and your retail and restaurant businesses, and which ones can be salvaged and which ones are just unfortunately going to go away. But thinking about preserving that those merchants and the ones in which you really feel like are the anchors for why people come downtown. And then after that, you need to think about construction and manufacturing. And if you have those in Los Llanos, then that's where you need to think next in terms of economic development. After that, it's very much a crapshoot because we just don't know how the policies are going to lift and allow people to go back to work completely just yet.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that existing levels of state funding to local jurisdictions could be in jeopardy?
In part, yes. And so everybody's going to feel the pain on this one, and we just have to be ready for it. And that's true in higher education and in K through 12 in ancillary ways. It'll be very intriguing to watch if there's any change there at all, given the legislation that we've passed. But the supposition is that everybody is going to feel some pain on this one. Health and Human Services might be the one place where we're able to use one-time money and sort of salvage the effort. But if this lingers on, then at some point, even that's going to contract a little bit.
Okay, so related to the higher education, what should the focus and priority be for the community colleges in the North and Far North, especially as it relates to workforce and economic development?
Yeah, I think, getting people in, let's say, coding, in computer-related fields, things that are going to be jobs down the road, especially if we move more toward an online ordering and sort of a home-based economy. Those would be things to watch for. I think on the retail and the hospitality side, it's going to be very tricky for the next 18 months. So shifting more toward that piece of those sectors of the economy. There might be a little bit more advanced manufacturing, and that's one place where there's a lot of question marks, but a lot of opportunity in terms of seeing more manufacturing of healthcare, supply chain needs, healthcare equipment. You might see a little bit more need there for community college training. But right now, I would say let's say the business piece of it and the ICT piece, those are probably the two places where you're going to have more demand on the other side of this than any other sectors.
Okay. You said that the rates will remain low. Do you see any drop at all, or just static where they are now?
If that means interest rates,
Right.
the idea there is that we're probably going to see we're still kind of testing the bottoms on mortgage rates, but we can't really go any farther down in terms of policy. So a lot's going to depend on global demand for bonds in our markets and how that continues to drive other rates down with it. We certainly should not see much of a lift over the next couple of years because the Federal Reserve is basically going to be hands off until we feel like we've totally turned the corner with respect to growth. And then they're going to be worried about inflation again. But it's going to take probably at least 18, 24 months.
Okay. What types of programs can local governments implement to support downtowns?
That's a great question. First thing is to try to rally what's available in terms of funding and in terms of support. The second one is to consider if there are banking partners who are willing to give relatively low interest loans and, in a sense, partner on risk locally, probably in your community banks, and then your larger banks and your credit unions all can maybe partner around that. After that, it gets very tricky other than to provide potential tax holidays or some type of direct relief in terms of permitting and other costs of engaging with the municipality. It's very tough in this environment because the other piece of it, to be very cold-blooded, is that you've got to think about return on investment, and doing something that's relatively uniform can basically feed good money after bad businesses. And this is just going to unfortunately expose the cracks in a lot of businesses that may have already been there. Hopefully we don't lose that many businesses in the end, but those are some things I would think about, especially on the banking partnership side. If you can get low interest rate loans that local banks are willing to book as a bet and as a partnership with the local area, that's something that might be worth looking at.
Thank you. So with the California state employees now taking a 10% pay cut, do you see some state folks thinking of early retirement?
Absolutely. And in fact, that's one of the things that is very tricky in this situation, is that by declaring there's going to be furloughs and potential salary cuts and even some layoffs, that might lead to people leaving, which could relieve the current liabilities in terms of running state government, but then forces a lot of liabilities onto our retirement systems. So that friction between keeping people in their job to sort of, not put as much on the retirement system, it may be changed by force, especially if you are under a more new system with respect to the retirement system where a few years of average salary dictates where you land. If you think your salary is going to drop, you may declare retirement to in a sense, protect your current level of pay.
Okay, thank you. So the presentation called out a significant decrease in environment expenditures by the state. Can you explain what that is? Or what
I think what that means is they're going to reduce how much that they are putting in against probably forest cleanup and other pieces out there to, what they think categorically is sort of environmental protection. It could be that they're going to contract, staffing and things like Air Resources Board and other parts of the state government. It's very hard to know. I did not look at the budget in that level of detail with respect to the categorical pieces underneath, but that'd be my take, is that's probably what they're talking about, because there's still, the environmental goals for California still remain in place. So that's not changing. And that could be a friction going forward, is how do you achieve those goals if the state's not really funding the partnership that it needs to?
Okay, that was our final question. So I'd like to thank you again, Dr. Eiler, and EFA, Chabon, and Kaiser Marston, our sponsors. And I look forward to our next webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, Vicki. Take care, folks.